Hey, welcome back to the NOTCAST. It's Boxing Day 2023, 26th of December 2023. And what better way to celebrate Boxing Day than to talk about everyone's favourite Pope of Mope, Morrissey, and the Bona Drag period, which runs from 1989 to 1990. I normally wear a t-shirt that's related to the act, band or event that I'm talking about. I'm not doing that today because, one, I only have one Morrissey t-shirt, which doesn't have Morrissey's name on it or his face, so you don't really know. Secondly, I think that there is an acrimony, I think, between Robert Smith and Morrissey, which I find funny. And so therefore I'm wearing a Cure t-shirt because I can. And there is also a brilliant bag, which my friend Lauren has, who is almost definitely not watching this, which says, "Be kind to Robert Smith or I will kill you," which is a parody of the "Be kind to Morrissey or I will kill you" t-shirt, which he did a few years ago. And I'm all for taking the piss out of things when it's deserved. So there you have it, really. No particular reason, it just appealed to me. Quite why I'm doing this on Boxing Day and not hanging out with other people, well, I do know, actually. There's nothing on television, and I've decided I'm going to be doing this instead. And when I do a NOTCAST, which is a strange word for them, my brain kind of hovers around various things and it kind of percolates about 7 or 8 different ideas at any one given point in time, and then all of a sudden it lands and it goes, "Tonight you will be talking about Morrissey's Bona Drag," which, by the way, I don't have the album on vinyl, and I'm more than okay about that because I have all the singles. And the album Bona Drag, released in October 1990, is but a compilation of singles, A-sides and B-sides from the Viva Hate album and the singles that went around after that, which, according to my notes here, was released in October 1990, which was a good month for music. October 1990 also saw the release of Pet Shop Boys' Behaviour and the Sisters of Mercy's Vision Thing and the Mission's Grains of Sand album. I think it also saw Fields of the Nephilim's Elysium, Morrissey's Bona Drag, Pop Leads Itself's Cure for Sanity. A good month for music. Expensive, though, very expensive. Of course, the cliche is the year that you turned 18 is the best year of music in your life. And the year that I turned 18 was 1991. It was a good year for music, 1991, but every year is a good year for music. So perhaps we shouldn't be listening to that, because once you start to close yourself off to good new music and think, well, the new music that's coming out just isn't as good as the old music, then you start to sound like Grandpa Simpson. Then I have to yell at clouds, and then I have to say things like, I used to know what it was, but then they changed what it was, and now what it is weird and scary, and it'll happen to you. Of course, Grandpa Simpson says it better than I do. So there we go. So picking up the Smith story, or more correctly, the Morrissey story, from January 1989, we actually start with the first solo Morrissey gig on, I think, the 23rd of December 1988 at the Wolverhampton Civic Hall. He contacted Johnny Marr and said, "Would you like to do a farewell show for the Smiths?" To which point Johnny went, "No, thank you, I wouldn't." And the other members of the Smiths, primarily Mike Joyce on drums, Andy Rourke on bass, Craig Gannon on guitar, agreed to play the show. Surprisingly, the guy that I was expecting to see on the stage wasn't on the stage. It was Stephen Street, who'd co-written all of the material on Viva Hate and was still writing songs with and for Morrissey at this period. That lineup, Morrissey, Craig Gannon, Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce, alongside Stephen Street on keyboards and Neil Taylor on guitars, recorded the third solo single by the Morrissey, the last of the famous International Playboys, released in January 1989. And this has on its cover art a photograph of, I think, a 7-year-old Morrissey there, blown up beyond all proportion. The original photo was only about this big or something like that. And again, the iconoclast turning his vision from the Smiths' artwork to himself in various positions and poses. So there we have it. So the sessions for the album Bona Drag. So Bona Drag, obviously, as is a compilation of material that was recorded between December or late 1987 and mid 1990. Effectively became Morrissey's second solo album by default. It wasn't intended to be a second solo album, the version of the album that we do have. It was meant to be a selection of new recordings, of which he has 15 or 16 new songs. But those songs were released piecemeal as A-sides and B-sides of five singles between January 1989 and October 1990, which made that by the time that the album came out, the album had already been heard by everybody that had been buying the singles as they were going along. Most of these singles were not released outside the UK. So to all intents and purposes, on a worldwide basis, Bona Drag is Morrissey's second solo LP. And it is so close, but no cigar, primarily on the grounds that it features Suede Head and Every Day's Like Sunday, the first two Morrissey A-sides, which means that it cannot escape the trajectory of being a singles compilation. For example, I think other Smiths albums, well, other albums by Morrissey that are compilations, primarily Hatful of Hollow, I've forgotten how to pronounce that, and World Won't Listen, Stroke Louder Than Bombs, would I think be far stronger if they separated out the songs which had already previously appeared on studio albums and then made them effectively albums, full stop, that just happened to have been released as singles, A's and B-sides, but not on any album. Same thing with Bona Drag. Having Suede Head and Every Day's Like Sunday on the album immediately draws your attention to the fact that this isn't the Morrissey second studio album as it should have been. There are songs that it's only done one studio album before this, so to have the second album include songs that were on the first studio album seems a little bit weird, a little bit perverse, and it kind of makes the album feel a little bit more of a fudge than perhaps it ever should be. Were I in charge? Obviously I'm not. I would have taken those two songs off, and you would have had an album that would have stood on its own as a second studio record that just happened to have been sneaked out as singles, A's and B-sides beforehand. Throughout the process of me talking through all of the Morrissey albums, I will be probably quite critical at various points around various decisions. It's very easy to do some armchair quarterbacking. I did an episode about gatekeeping recently. I think everybody is entitled to have an opinion about absolutely everything. And obviously you don't know necessarily what's happening inside until you actually are inside the whale. And so therefore I'm able to make decisions or pass opinions with the benefit of hindsight and judgment from being outside of the situation. I don't know what was going on there. I read Morrissey's autobiography, think I know, not quite sure. Then again, Morrissey's autobiography has a distant relationship to the facts of the matter on various occasions, which of course we will get to when I get to talking about that. The sessions to create the album started in January 1989 with one lineup, and the tracks were released as singles as they were finished before the album itself was completed, with the idea that some of the songs that were on the B-sides were going to be on the album anyway. Bona Drag as is, either this version or the 2010 expanded edition here, which is available on CD and vinyl, is not what the album was ever intended to be. It was intended to be something a little bit different. And so I look at both of these as effectively almost a pick and mix from which you can make a selection of your track listings and come up with how you think the album should be configured. But we have to go through the album song by song, minute by minute, blow by blow, split by split before we get to that, I think, because Bona Drag is actually where the story ends. It's not where the story begins. The story begins with, of course, the last of the famous international playboys. Somebody asked Elvis Costello about this song, and he said, if nothing else, Morrissey buys, or more correctly, Morrissey writes incredible song titles. The Last of the Famous Fast of the Famous International Playboys is one of the best song titles of all time. It really, really is. So, as an A-side, a bit controversial. Here's a copy of the UK 12-inch from 1989, which for some reason I've put the A-side at the back. I'm going to have to rectify that immediately. And the vinyl groove says Escape from Valium, which I think is perhaps an unmade John Carpenter movie. So Last of the Famous International Playboys is, I think, one of the finest Morrissey singles that there is, not only for the A-side, but also for the extra tracks which come onto it. But before we go anywhere, recorded November to December 1988, played live at Morrissey's one-off solo gig in December 1988, for which was filmed for the video of Last of the Famous International Playboys and Interesting Drug. And I think it's a great song. It's the first song I saw Morrissey play live in 1991 in Leicester. It's a fabulous opening track for the LP. The opening stanzas, "Dear hero imprisoned, with all the new crimes that you are perfecting. I can't help quoting you because everything that you said rings true." And you kind of go, well, what fantastic lyrics these are. So the lyrics are, I think, and you can kind of see them through the lens of talking about the Smith split, is about the element of, for example, there's a theory that people behave a certain way because you treat them a certain way. So if you treat people like animals, they behave like animals. If you treat people like criminals, they behave like criminals. And it's you have to make a decision about where in the cause and effect and the symptom kind of element of that does that come from. There's an element of, and obviously as Morrissey sang on Sister, I'm a Poet, I love the romance of crime. The idea of finding a gang, the place that you belong, where previously you hadn't belonged. A lot of Morrissey songs are, in my opinion, or were about articulating the sense of not belonging in the world in which you were forced to exist. So, for example, songs like Last of the Famous International Playboys, Interesting Drug, First of the Gang to Die, all songs where they're kind of like going about, well, life is hard enough when you belong here, to quote Bengalian platforms. But the idea around that fame, or more correctly, crime being seen as a metaphor for fame and success, the idea of a power struggle that you would have between who you are and the sense of belonging. I've mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs before, but one of the things in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the third on the pyramid, is that of love and belonging, that sense of needing to belong and be part of something, and to be a participant of, and to feel accepted, and to have found a group and a tribe that you belong in. And you know, people look for that in relationships, they look for that in friendships, they look for that in all manner of places, sometimes in the bottle of a glass or in a stranger's bed. Maybe that's a line I should put in a song. But it's around that that search for belonging. And Last of the Famous International Playboys, almost called it an Interesting Drug, is a song that really, really articulates that. So there is this line around, in our lifetime, those who kill, the news world hands them stardom, and these are the ways on which I was raised. But I never wanted to kill. I am not naturally evil. Such things I do to make myself more attractive to you. Have I failed? What a fantastic lyric. People don't write lyrics like that, and people should write lyrics like that. It's really easy to write good lyrics, and then you end up, I'm going to be bitchy about a band that are current, Yard Act. Their lyrics, I've read them and I'm like, they're not very good. So, you know, if you haven't got a great voice, make your lyrics great. And if you haven't got a great voice and you haven't got great lyrics, why are you the singer? Because there's other people that are going to be better at it. Whereas Morrissey has that combination of being able to write amazing lyrics, or has been, plus a fantastic melodic voice, which to this day is still, I think, one of the strongest voices and most distinctive voices that there is in current recording acts. But this song takes crime, the idea of needing to belong, the idea of doing things to be attractive to other people, to be accepted, to be loved and belonged, and using crime as a metaphor for fame and success. Really, really interesting. And it's got a fabulous keyboard solo by Stephen Street. The other thing I will say is this was initially written in 1987 in the Viva Hate era, but it wasn't utilised. I think the song was rewritten, some new music was added to it, the lyrics were maybe updated a little bit. And during the recording of it, this was the first time, because obviously it's the first time that Stephen Street had worked with Andy Rourke and Mike Joyce and Craig Gannon. There was this sense Street had perceived a power struggle between him and the ex-Smiths. The idea that, you know, Stephen Street, who'd previously been engineer and producer of Smith's material, had now been promoted to co-writer. There was an idea of a power imbalance between the two. Stephen Street felt that he wasn't necessarily being given the leeway and the freedom and the reach that perhaps Johnny Marr had been, because in the former Smith's mind, he was just the producer. What's he doing currently, suddenly like cuckooing in to take Johnny Marr's place, even though the band itself was obviously long gone at that point. Really, really interesting. There were a couple of other things that led the relationship between Stephen Street and Morrissey to fracture. We'll get to those when we get to the relevant single. I think it's fair to say. There are 2 B-sides on this 12-inch. One is Lucky Lisp, which is a tribute stroke bastardization of Lieber and Stoller's Lucky Lips. And then Michael's Bones, which is, I think, a very underrated Morrissey song and should be better known by most people. It's a grim, dark song. It's like the equivalent of Stand By Me, but written through Morrissey's lens, about finding the body of a dead child, face down on a training grounds. He laid where he fell, his body undisturbed. Very, very similar to that. And kind of like this type of thing that you can kind of say, well, you see some traces from some of the early work, things like Suffer Little Children, for example, or The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. But also that idea around that, when you're young or younger, the idea of dying young can be seen as quite romantic by some people. The idea of live fast, die low, die young, leave a good-looking corpse. I'm only joking, of course. The idea of that as a concept is kind of addressed through Michael. Actually, dead bodies are pretty gruesome. I have seen some through the course of the early part of my professional career. Some dead bodies. I don't recommend it. They died in gruesome and unpleasant ways. And it's kind of like, sometimes you see a body, like the cover of Bowie's Lodger, for example, and the leg is at a certain angle, and you kind of go, that's not natural. That's a death. And then you kind of think about, for example, if you've known somebody that's died by suicide from jumping off a building, I have, or if you've seen the scene of a crime or a murder or something, and you kind of go, it's not romantic, it's fucking gruesome and heartbreaking to go, that was the last part of it. Now, if you want to be Klingon about it, you can raise a grunt to the heavens and warn the gods that a warrior is coming. If you want to go all Worf on it, maybe my brother might do that. Actually, that'd be pretty cool to have a funeral. So if you've got a funeral, have people to do the Klingon death chant, by the way. The geeks will laugh, everyone else will be appalled, but it won't matter because you're dead. So there you go. So that's, moving swiftly on before I get too stuck into talking about the intricacies of early episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation. That is Morrissey's The Last of the Famous International Playboys, one of the best solo singles that he would make. The second solo single from this period, which came out a little bit later, I think this was about May, is Interesting Drug. Again, a fabulous song with the much missed Kirsty MacColl on vocals. Again, Craig, Neil, Andy, Mike Joyce. No sign of Stephen Street. We'll have to check the reading. We'll have to check actually the writing credits to see if he's on there, but he wasn't on that. So, yeah, the writing credits. Such a little thing makes such a big difference. Is a Street co-write there. That's the main B-side, and Interesting Drug itself is a Stephen Street A-side. This is one of his finest singles, and I love Interesting Drug. And I love Interesting Drug because it sounds like if you listen to things like Interesting Drug, Suede Head, Every Day is Like Sunday, Last of the Famous International Playboys, you wouldn't get the sense that Morrissey had split from his main writing partner. You just go, okay, so they're going in a new direction now. They're trying something a little different. And that's testament, I think, to the strength of Stephen Street's writing ability, but also the dexterity of the band that he was working with. As you get further and further into his solo career, it becomes more and more apparent that he's not working with Johnny Marr anymore. At this point, if you kind of squinted, you could maybe think about Morrissey's solo career in the way that you would think about, let's say, Suede, around about the time of Head Music. The main co-writer of the music had left. Another writer had joined the group. They'd expanded their sound a little bit. They're still bloody good, though. Bloody good. And that's a key part of it. Interesting Drug has a really brilliant lyric in there. There are some bad people on the rise, and they're saving their own skins by ruining people's lives. Young married couple in debt, ever felt had. On a government scheme designed to kill your dream. Oh mum, oh dad, once poor, always poor. Interesting Drug. And that's pretty much the whole of the lyric. And it's a brilliant lyric. It's a lyric that was talking about things that not many people were talking about at that point in time in the late 80s. So the idea of there are some bad people on the rise. In the video for Interesting Drug, it's actually written on the wall, there are some bad people on the right, making it very clear which side of the political agenda Morrissey then sat at. So he was talking very, very clearly about the way in which the government, which was very right-wing in 1989, peak Thatcherism, had a government scheme which was designed to kill your dream and to make you feel like you were in debt all the time. So let's talk about that for a minute. Firstly, there was a thing called the YTS, the Youth Training Scheme, which was a way of massaging, or a nice way, bullshitting, the unemployment figures. Because if people weren't unemployed, then the government could convince us, the unemployment figures have gone down. Well, the unemployment figures had gone down because they'd changed the definition of unemployment. Also, for example, there are far more obese people than there used to be because the BMI definition of what was obese has been changed. It was changed in around about 95, 96, by the way. The BMI to be classified as obese in around about 1995 was about 35. It was then brought down to about 30. And suddenly, millions of people became obese overnight by doing absolutely nothing. The reality hadn't changed. The way in which you measured the reality had changed. And this was the same thing with the unemployment figures. The government said, unemployment figures are lower than they've been for ages. The reason they were employment figures were lower than they've been for ages because people were being forced to go into things like youth training schemes and apprenticeships. They were still unemployed because, as far as I'm concerned, employment exists when you're paid to do work. Because that's your compensation for sacrificing your time and your skills. It's effectively, employment is selling your time and your skills in order to be able to do things like pay bills and buy records, right? And when I bought this record, which was second-hand, or more correctly, not second-hand, it was an X-chart deletion from Hob Days in Selly Oak in Birmingham. It was about 95 pence, which, because there wasn't a national minimum wage, was the equivalent to about an hour of my life. Because when I first started working, I was paid between £1 and £1.50 an hour, which you try surviving on £45 a week. Even in 1989, it was brutal and tough. And effectively, if I hadn't lived with my parents, I'd have had to be homeless. So the way in which the government did that, and that government scheme designed to kill your dreams, was to take you out of the unemployment numbers, was to massage the figures. Government didn't care about you, never cared about you if you were young. It didn't, because you were never going to vote for them anyway. As George Osborne said in 2014 or so, when Nick Clegg suggested that they invest in social housing, what George Osborne said was, no, because they're never going to vote for us anyway, so why are we going to do it? Which fundamentally misrepresents and perverts democracy, because the idea behind democracy is you represent the best wishes of the people and you work to make the country the best place possible for the biggest number of people. You don't go, well, we're going to do this because it's going to get us re-elected. You go, if we're a good government, we'll get re-elected. You don't do things because it's going to get you re-elected. And that's why some people, as Morrissey says in Glamorous Glue, we won't vote Conservative and we never will. Or London is dead. We never have. And that is where some of that comes from. The idea that there's a government scheme designed to kill your dream takes you off the unemployment line so you don't look unemployed in the eyes of the statisticians. So the newspapers can go, it's working, less unemployment. No, it isn't. It's unemployed, you're just rebadged, like Fanta suddenly calling itself something else, or the difference between a Fiat, which is an Italian Fiat, and a Seat, which is a Fiat made in the factories in Spain, is called a Seat. It's this type of stuff, it's rebadging and changing reality to make it look better to appeal to the people that read the newspapers. So the people that read the newspapers at the time, and let's say there was Daily Express, Telegraph, Mail on Sunday, Sun, News of the World, and then you have a smaller number of papers that weren't kind of pleasing their corporate paymasters, like the Mirror and whatever. They were saying, actually, employment's gone down, this government's really good, you should vote for them. And it's like, no, you're just hiding and changing how people judge the reality of the situation. Because no matter how you change or measure something, the reality is always going to be the same. It doesn't matter how you measure something, that's the reality and the way that the reality works. I got distracted there to talk about a government scheme offering money and work as a substitute for fun, which is obviously one of the key parts of interesting drug. One of the other things around that is there's this thing where it says on a government scheme designed to kill your dreams, designed to force you into work. I was looking for a job and then I found a job, and heaven knows I'm miserable now, is part of it. But also that element of going, right, so you're on this scheme, and the only thing you're getting out of it is money. Because if you're doing work that you don't like, don't believe in, it's a very long 38 hours a week if you don't enjoy the stuff that you're spending most of 5 of your waking days doing all day around, as if somehow work in itself was the only thing that matters. And even now, our current government talk a lot about work, as if work itself is the only thing that matters, and it isn't. And this is where I think that there's going to be a big electoral reckoning at some point pretty soon. Is there's the idea, well, work itself isn't actually anything unless you like it and you want to do it. The only thing it does do, if you don't like it, is it pays you money, which you need to have in order to not starve. And even then, the fundamental social contract that exists between work and having enough money has become disconnected. So, for example, 30, 40 years ago, you looking at the way in which society was based, and if you had an average salary in the UK, you could live on your own and you could get a mortgage if that's what you wanted to do. These days, it's impossible to live on your own on minimum wage in anywhere apart from about 3 towns in the north in Britain, and it's impossible to live on your own even on an average salary in the vast majority of the UK. You have to meet somebody and be in a relationship with somebody, and that's the way in which, for example, people that are single are penalised and discriminated against by the structure of society. But it's all invisible because poverty is shameful, as the lyric goes, and if you want, I wonder why you're only half ashamed, because enough is too much in the lyric here. That's where Interesting Drug is one of the best lyrics which I've ever read. And it works fabulously. It would be a work of poetry that would be regarded far better by people if it just existed on the page sometimes. Up to a certain point, Morrissey was certainly one of the best poets in music, who described the dichotomies and the contradictions inside modern reality. And that's one of the reasons why lots of people liked him, because lots of people go, Morrissey's the only person that's really thinking about the world that I live in, a world where there's things like poverty and loneliness, and there's almost like a war against intelligence or singledom inside society. And 'twas was ever the way. Was always thus, and what can you do about it? Not very much, really. And it's kind of going, well, actually, this if you're working, for example, it's kind of going, what it's trying to do is trying to marginalise the human need for recreation and pleasure. And every animal on the planet chases recreation and pleasure, because we're put on this life to do more than just sit at a desk and type emails or work behind a factory or serve the scum public. I've met the public. I'm not a fan. I'm sure some of them aren't a fan of me. Feelings mutual, guys. Sorry. Even in nature, and if you've ever seen that wonderful picture of the dolphin with its nose stuck inside the pufferfish, because the pufferfish have this poison in them, but it doesn't work on dolphins. It just gets them high. So they go around sticking their noses inside the pufferfish to get a cheap thrill, kind of like, nature's underwater swimming kind of ecstasy pill. You sit around a dolphin, I'm going to poke you, and then I'm going to feel a bit giddy for a bit, like someone's, huffing laughing gas or something. Humans are animals, despite how we want to think otherwise. We're a virus for shoes, to quote Bill Hicks, and at the same point, we're also able to look at it and go, well, actually, what is the point of life if you don't have fun? Fun is fundamental to the point of life, and that is one of the key things in Interesting Drug. And if life itself is substandard, people think taking drugs or recreational drug taking, for example, is a sign of, as Cameron put it, venal criminality. He was an idiot too. A man who thought a suit and a sharp aside was a substitute for having policies of any meaning or substance. You go, no. Again, you're mistaking symptom and cause. People don't take drugs because they're criminals. People take drugs, or they drink, or they have sex, or they do all the things they do because life itself is really bloody difficult and hard. It's a different kind of difficult to when we were cavemen and we had to go around and chase our food with loincloths and spears. But life is still really difficult. If you talk to, I don't know, somebody from the 1800s, for example, and you explain the concept of annual leave and tax to them, they could probably be like, really? And private property and land? Who owns the land? Some guy somewhere just went, that's my land, I'll have it. And then you have to pay them for it. And all that type of stuff is about the weaponization of existing natural resources. I think that there is a real battle there inside Interesting Drug, and it articulates all of these ideas. And I spent probably 10 minutes talking about a song that's only 3.5 minutes long, but it's that bloody good. It's one of the best songs that came out in the year 1989. And it, by the way, this was the last top 10 hit for a long time, until I think The More You Ignore Me, The Closer I Get, in 1994 for Morrissey. It peaked at number 8 in the UK pop charts. And it was backed by Such a Little Thing Makes Such a Big Difference, which is based upon never the melody and the arpeggio that underpins the track is based upon Never Turn Your Back on Mother Earth by Sparks. It's also inspired by the quote from John Betjeman, where he said, having a penis is like being shackled to an idiot. Such a little thing makes such a big difference is a sly aside around how male sexuality sometimes causes people to think the little heads are not the big one and do stupid things. And as an owner of a penis, I can confirm that this does occasionally happen to men. Obviously, not me. I am a shining light of perfection. But that's not really the point of the discussion. The point is that such a little thing can make such a big difference. And if you think about, the amount of time that humans spend, for example, chasing forms of gratification, be they physical, drug-induced, sexual, alcohol, whatever, even religious epiphanies. Again, it's all about the human need for escape and meaning inside a life that itself is pretty tough to live within. The third track on the 12-inch of Interesting Drug is the first solo Morrissey live song to be released, a cover of the Smiths' Sweet and Tender Hooligan, taken from that one-off gig at the Wolverhampton Civic, which, by the way, was the first time I'd heard the song Sweet and Tender Hooligan, because I was limited by what I could afford to buy and what the shops had at the time. So I heard that and I was like, that's really good. I best going to go and check this band, the Smiths, out that Morrissey was in before he got anywhere else. So yeah, there you go. That's a good one. Interesting Drug did have an interesting limited edition release. Here is the 12-inch, the special etched disc, which I think is the Motorcycle Au Pair Boy version of the single, which is a bizarre name, but so be it. And you open it up, it's a 2-tracker on the 12-inch, and on the 12-inch there we have Interesting Drug and Such a Little Thing Makes a Big Difference, but also on the other side we have the famous Oscar Wilde etching, which regards him as Motorcycle Au Pair Boy. This is lovely and silly, and I think it's funny, and it makes me laugh, the idea of it. It really, really does. But of course, a 2-track 12-inch is never going to set the world alight, I think it's fair to say. So you were able to pick this one up again, discounted X charts when it came out, before both songs later appeared on Bona Drag, which of course is a fabulous place for those songs to exist. So that's Interesting Drug. And Stephen Street added an injunction to Morrissey because there was a dispute over the royalties that he was due as a result of having written the songs for Viva Hate and not having received, I think, what he regarded to be sufficient compensation of royalties for either that or his production role in the band. When Morrissey did play his first solo gig at the Wolverhampton Civic, he also had the unique and unusual accolade, if accolade is the word, of being the first time an artist had performed live where he was being sued individually by each member of his band, even though they were playing on stage. So Craig Gannon was suing for royalties, which resulted in the writing credits for Ask to be changed, and a payment of approximately £44,000 to him. Andy Rourke was suing for royalties in relation to the infamous Smiths court case, which will come up to a vicious head in 1996. The fundamental bottom line of that discussion is that Andy and Mike were paid 10% of performance royalties and performance fees for being in the Smiths. Johnny and Morrissey were paid 40% plus writing royalties, which means that effectively they earned a heck of a lot more than Andy and Mike. Now, you can argue that Andy and Mike had a lack of intellectual curiosity about the business arrangements, which ultimately didn't serve in their favour. They weren't on the record contract that was signed between the Smiths and Rough Trade. But, that said, fundamentally, as Morrissey said, my life is a succession of people saying goodbye. There were, at least for a period of time, a track record of insufficient compensation, according to the artists, from Morrissey. So Stephen Street hit Morrissey with an injunction around writing credits, and that meant that, as Morrissey is often wont to do, changed his lineup and didn't work with Stephen Street again, which meant that there were no extra songs that were written after that period. I mean, ultimately, pay your guys. You know, money is not the most important thing in the world, despite what lots of people think. And there are principles that really, really matter. And, you know, I have had a significant impact upon my life by somebody that thought that money was far more important than fairness. And I'll talk about that some other time, undoubtedly. But a person that effectively put a cash value on what they thought the relationship between a child and his father was worth, and was prepared to sacrifice that in order to get some more money into their bank account. And everyone has their price, Bob, as Roger Waters sang on Amused to Death, and yours was pretty low. So, in Japan, the last of the famous international playboys, An Interesting Drug, didn't get a discreet release on their own, by the way. They got the release on this, a 5-track EP, taking its cover from the Motorcycle Au Pair etched disc version of Interesting Drug, the tan and gold. And it was a 5-track EP featuring Interesting Drug, the last of the famous international playboys, Such a Little Thing Makes Such a Big Difference, Lucky Lisp, and Michael's Bones. And I bought this because at the time Bona Drag hadn't come out. I wanted the tracks on CD, and this was actually the cheapest and most affordable way of getting them, because the CD singles were starting to get scarce. So there you go. Not very interesting. It's more of a curiosity as opposed to anything that's very, very specific. The third single from Bona Drag, which came out in late 1989, around about October 1989. And this is perhaps a more controversial track, Ouija Board, which was produced by a new production team, Clive Langer and Alan Winstanley, who I think worked with Morrissey and also worked with Madness. This was recorded at a studio in Reading in September 1989. It had Kevin Armstrong was on guitars, Andrew Parisi was back on drums, Matthew Seligman was on bass, and this is a strange single. Now, so this is where I think I have to talk about a couple of things. So, Ouija Board was a Stephen Street track, and Yes, I Am Blind was written between Morrissey and Andy Rourke. So Morrissey and Andy Rourke settled out of court for a payment of approximately £89,000, and Morrissey agreed to write some songs with Andy Rourke. He wrote 2 songs with Andy Rourke, and according to what I'd read in an interview with Andy not long before he died, Andy never got a royalty payment for those 2 songs, which is pretty odd considering those songs were on Bona Drag, which was, at that point at least, Morrissey's biggest selling solo LP, and had been for quite some period of time. Ouija Board also brought into the frame Kevin Armstrong. If you're a David Bowie fan, you'll recognise Kevin Armstrong. He was the 5th guy in Tin Machine, played with the band live, wrote some of the material, didn't appear in the photographs. So when Tin Machine came off the road late 1989, Morrissey hooked up with Kevin, who had written a couple of songs on Tin Machine #1, which isn't in itself a recommendation. And Kevin played on the track. So there you go. In between just jetting off to, I think it was Dublin or Australia or somewhere, to record Tin Machine 2, that then sat on ice for a period of time until it was released in 1991. Ouija Board didn't make the UK top 10. It was the first time where I think Morrissey started to look like he was stumbling in public, where he was smaller than he used to be. Because remember, he had a number 8 and he had a number 5 with suede head, and I think that's the famous International Playboys got to number 6. Ouija Board got to number 18, and it didn't make the top 10 for a number of reasons. The first one is it's not an amazing song in terms of context of being a single. It's a really good album track, by the way. If it was an album track, I'd be like, fantastic album track. But it's not necessarily a great single. It had bad reviews. It was also, I think for the first time, Morrissey was starting to represent what was regarded as the old Manchester. So around about the time this came out, October 1989, we had the rise of the Spiral Carpets had got the new singer Tom Hingley. Other bands, you might have heard of them, Stone Roses, I think they turned out to be quite big and quite good, had released their debut album, the one that everyone's heard and seen of with the lemon on the cover. She Bangs the Drums as well. And Fool's Gold was just about to come out. Happy Mondays had got to the lower reaches of the 40 with Rope for Luck, the Vince Clarke remix, and were just about to release Hallelujah as well. So there was a changing of the guard. New Order had split. Electronic had just released their first single, which was Bernard Sumner and Johnny Marr. Morrissey was seen as a representative of the old Manchester that no longer existed, with New Order and the Smiths both split. And so therefore, it was seen as perhaps the first sign that Morrissey was one of, quote, yesterday's men, unquote, although obviously he disagrees with that. Because of this and the fact that it didn't make the top 10, Morrissey effectively aborted the album and said, right, well, I'm going to I'm going to finish what I've got, release them as singles, but Bona Drag itself isn't going to be the second Morrissey album. And so we had another 2 singles after this, which effectively scooped up all of the songs that otherwise would have been on the album. Languished Winstanley helped Moz to finish this album. And with Ouija Board, which I think is a fabulously funny song about Morrissey contacting somebody that he knew who was now dead and then getting told to push off, is one of the funniest Morrissey songs that there is. On the 2010 edition of the Bona Drag album, the expanded version, the push-off section of the track is inexplicably and maddeningly deleted by Morrissey in a way that makes no sense and completely spoils the punchline of the song. Without that, the song is a joke with no payoff. It really is. And a joke with no payoff just isn't funny. It's a jape, but it's pointless. It's like slapstick. Having that section in the song makes the song better, and it feels incomplete without it. We also had Yes, I Am Blind, and which was obviously one of the Andy Rourke co-writes. And we also had East West on the B-side of the 12-inch. East West is a cover version of Herman's Fucking Hermits. Not the best band in the world at all. Moz wrote his own third verse to the track because the song itself, as released in the 60s by Herman's Hermits, had 2 verses and they needed a third one, so he wrote his own verse and he's uncredited on that. I don't understand that. I don't particularly care. I don't like Herman's Hermits. I've never listened to them. I only know the version that's on the CD and the 12-inch and the various reissues. This is the American CD single, by the way, of Ouija Board. Again, probably cheaper for me to get that than any other version. Moz was starting to stumble a little bit in public, and cracks were starting to show. But March 1990 saw the release of the 4th single, which I think this prompted Melody Maker to publish an article called Morrissey Splits from Himself, because his reputation for getting through solo musicians was starting to become notorious. For example, obviously he'd worked with Mike, Andy, Craig, Neil Taylor, Kevin Armstrong, Vinnie Riley. Those are his guitarists, and Stephen Street. 6 guitarists in the case of 1 solo album and 4 singles. Then we had obviously his bass players, which I think he was on his 3rd bass player by now. And then we had obviously 2 drummers with Andrew Parisi back on drums, and Mike Joyce as well. So the guy was getting through a fair ton of personnel. Good thing it said Morrissey on the front and not the name of a band, because that band wouldn't have existed pretty soon. So we have November Spawned a Monster, the 4th solo single from the Bona Drag period, the 6th Morrissey solo single. And this got to number 12 in the UK charts. I remember watching half of the video on the chart show on Saturday mornings. I'd watched the chart show, which reminds me there was a letter into Viz going, I don't know why bands make videos for the whole song because TV never shows them. But the video for it was shot in Death Valley. It gave us the photograph that appeared in 2 different colour schemes on the covers of the various versions of Bona Drag. This one is more accurate because that's the colour of shirt that he wore in the video, I think, or it might be wrong. But I don't like historical revisionism. Never have. Don't like deleting verses out of songs. Unless, of course, you're Guns N' Roses. And you delete the whole of One in a Million because it's a racist, sexist piece of shit, that song. This was the first time that Morrissey said that he no longer missed Johnny Marr. And it's an ambitious, forward-thinking song about disabled rights. The idea of somebody that has a disability, born in November, hence November Spawned a Monster, wanting love and acceptance and a job and being able to go out to the shops and wear the clothes that they chose themselves. It's inspired by the New York Dolls track Frankenstein. It spoke very clearly to the audience as well. Morrissey's fan base, I was one of them at the time, kind of saw themselves as people that didn't quite fit in to the world that they were forced to be part of, much like Smiths fans. And somebody I think once described it as almost permanent adolescence. When you're adolescent and you're going, well, who am I? Where am I? What role do I have in society? What role am I going to have in the rest of the world? What's my economic situation going to be like? Am I going to love anybody? Is anyone going to love me? All those type of stuff. This song spoke to them, but used the veil of somebody that was, unable to walk and had a disability, using them as going, well, basically going, people that have disabilities are entitled to love. I'm human and I need to be loved just like everybody else does, of course, from how soon is now. And as somebody who has disability in his life, which I do, they're certainly not less of a person or half of a person because they happen to be disabled. And the way that the current government and society demonises people with disabilities into acceptable forms of disabilities, i.e. you have a wheelchair, versus unacceptable forms of disabilities which are invisible to people that only have eyes and not brains, is something that I feel quite strongly about. I try not to go on too much about it. In fact, this may be the first time I've ever mentioned it on here. But that is a key part of the song, is kind of speaking to the audience and going, give us you're tired, you're poor, you're weary, etc. You're disabled, you're people in wheelchairs, you're people that can't walk, or these people that have multiple sclerosis or whatever the form of disability might be. For them to go, these people deserve love and respect and are as human as you or I, the people that do not have the disabilities. It's a fabulous song, and I've always loved it when it's been played live. Works very, very well. It's backed with 2 additional tracks. These are He Knows I'd Love to See Him, which I think is a Rourke co-write. Let's quickly check the writing credits. Yes, He Knows I'd Love to See Him is Armstrong, and then Girl Least Likely To is by Morrissey and Andy Rourke, the last of the 2 songs that Andy wrote with him. And He Knows I'd Love to See Him is heavily, heavily, heavily autobiographical. It is influenced by the fact that following the publication of Margaret on a Guillotine, Morrissey was interviewed under caution by the police, hence the line, the police that actually know me. And was interviewed under caution, do you actually want to behead Margaret Thatcher? To which the answer, of course, from any sane people being asked to be, actually, mate, no, I don't, but thanks for asking. And it's very autobiographical. And you can also say He Knows I'd Love to See Him is kind of a little bit about Johnny Marr going, he knows I'd love to see him as well, which is a strange song to admit, but possibly the biggest split in Morris's life at that point had been the separation, the severed alliance, as Johnny Rogan had it in his book, between the 2. And then The Girl's Least Likely To, which is a character study of a friend who was ambitious. They instantly recognised it, and they instantly they said to Morrissey, "Is this song about me?" And obviously, in his passive-aggressive way, he didn't necessarily confirm it vastly publicly. That was the fourth single, number 18, well, number 12. Number 5, the fifth single, just before the release of Bona Drag, was the fifth single. Again, Morrissey splitting from himself. Piccadilly Polari. I think this one was only issued in the UK as a single, which means we have to skip the US single for November Spawned a Monster and go to the UK CD single and the UK 12-inch for Piccadilly Polari. This is a song that I think is really good. Really good. Maybe not a great single, but a really good track. Got to number 18 in the charts. Polari, by the way, is a secret gay language that is spoken, especially when it wasn't as socially acceptable to be gay in London. It was kind of like the use of certain words would indicate to people a nod and a wink is as good as a rush and a push and the land is ours, for example. But it's as good as to say, so the use of certain words like ig, bonavada, polare, which is the language itself. These are kind of words which signify membership of a secret cabal. Not cabal, that's not the right word, but the membership of a secret club, where if you knew the words, you knew what you were, and because you weren't able to necessarily, especially during the time of Clause 28, be open about your sexuality to say, actually, I'm gay or I'm straight. It was seen as a shameful thing, and I remember my dad telling homophobic jokes when I was about 15, 16, and thinking there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just sat there going, all right, I'm 15 and you're 50 and I know you're wrong. That shit ain't right to talk about. There was ridiculous newspaper articles that demonised people that weren't straight heterosexuals, and there were absurd allegations around how everyone who was gay was a pedophile and all that kind of stuff. Whereas actually, I think probably you just had to work at the BBC in certain television programmes. And Piccadilly Polari is a song about leaving home, going somewhere where you belong, somewhere where you feel that you might be home. And the idea, especially in the outro, which is mostly sung live, the "No Dad, I Won't Be Home Tomorrow" line, which was restored in 2010 for the expanded version of Bona Drag, alongside the third verse, which is, in a cold water room, it's not much, I know. The song is really about moving to Piccadilly and finding a new life as an adult when you realise you can't go home anymore, and home is not a place that can be homely for you. Because as I've said before, home is a feeling, it's not a place. And if home isn't welcoming, and if you're, let's say, a gay person in 1980s, 1990s, or somebody that felt like they didn't fit in to the world, who followed their instincts and were told that they sinned, to quote Pet Shop Boys, a different point of view, this was a thing where suddenly you was the structure, the support structure that was around you of, mums, dads, parents, homes, they were all stripped away from you because you committed that terrible sin of not making anybody a grandparent. And you kind of go, that's bullshit. But at the same point, when you're young and don't have very much money, you have very little in the way of power and agency to change that. So you have to then go, right, so I have to enter a new secret world, unprepared and unequipped, to survive in it and do my best as I go along. We had on the B-side, by the way, of Piccadilly Polari, which didn't have a video. There were 2 extra tracks. These extra tracks are called At Amber, which was originally called Bed Took Fire, I think. And then Get Off the Stage, which is one of my favourite Morrissey songs, Get Off the Stage, which again is, it's the third Morrissey Rourke co-write, sorry about that. And Amber is, I think, the last of the Morrissey Street tracks, whereas Piccadilly Polari is Morrissey Armstrong. So he's really scooting around. You've got like 3 people to replace Stephen Street, which is a little strange, but there you are. And the last track is Get Off the Stage, which, as far as I know, it should have been, in my opinion, the last track on Bona Drag, but it wasn't. Because it's hilarious. It's a pointed response to the uncharted territory of aging rock stars. People like Mick Jagger, who were like 48, 49 at the time, and were aging disgracefully. It's a song that's like, you silly old man with your Fender guitar and your mascara and your leg is back in plaster and your leather trousers. And the song that you sang is just like the last one. And the next one, When Will It End? Get Off the Stage. Morrissey apparently expressed some regret about the song in 2005 and thought that he hadn't have written it. It's a shame, because I think it's a really funny, silly song with a music hall feel. I absolutely love it. I wish he'd play it live, but I wouldn't see it if he played it live anyway, because I haven't seen him live for a very long time indeed. Those are the 15 or so songs, 14 or so songs that make up Bona Drag sessions. There are some more songs which were released later on, but the album itself was released in October 1990 as a CD. This was released worldwide. It sold by the bucket load. Certainly at the time it came out, it sold more than Viva Hate, and for a long period of time I think was his best-selling album. And aside from the fact that it recycles the B-sides Will Never Marry and Hairdresser on Fire, Every Day is Like Sunday, Suede Head and Disappointed, it doesn't have Sister I'm a Poet on. Why? It's a brilliant track. It was effectively Morrissey's second solo album with a couple of early singles that were shoved on it as well. In 2010, the album was reissued in an expanded format, but it was also expanded and reduced. This is the CD version of it, which again features a non-period photograph of Morrissey. So this looks like about 1994, and this photograph here looks like it's about 1992. But Morrissey plays hard and loose with chronology, by the way. So, for example, he's changed the track listing of the album. He's edited the push-off section out of Ouija board. He's added some verses into Piccadilly Polare. The album on CD also has 5 previously unreleased songs, and it was trailed by a remix of, trailed by a reissue of Every Day is Like Sunday, backed with a remix of November called November the 2nd, which was due to be released in 1990, but Morrissey chose not to issue that remix, probably following on from the Charming Man New York vocal debacle of 1983. The extra tracks on here are Happy Lovers, At Last United, which is from Viva Hate, period. Lifeguard on Duty, again from Viva Hate. Please Help the Cause Against Loneliness, a demo version, which was released in 1988 as a single by Sandy Shaw, with effectively the Viva Hate era of Morrissey's solo band with Sandy Shaw singing on there. It was backed by a track, by the way, this Lover of the Century, which is written by Sandy Shaw and Mark E. Nevin, who we will see more of when we get to the next Morrissey album, Kill Uncle. And then there's also Oh Phony, which has a fabulous line, I think, about making Hitler look like a bus conductor. And Bed Took Fire, which is an early version about Amber. And then, just to mess with your chronology a little bit more, the 20th track is Let the Right One Slip In, long version. Let the Right One Slip In was recorded 2 years after everything else on this album in 1992, the B-side sessions around about the time of the Your Arsenal album. And Let the Right One Slip In was, if I recall correctly, not released in the UK officially until this release. It may have been on the EMI singles box set. But the Let the Right One Slip In was a B-side to a single, Tomorrow, that wasn't released in the UK. So that was an unusual choice to throw an album track, or more correctly a B-side that came from a session 2 years after the rest of the album was recorded, and to include it. It was a little strange, but there you are. So this whole period, Bona Drag, was a period where it felt like Morrissey was trying to, well, like all people, making it up as they go along, but trying to work out what's going to happen next. What's my band going to be? Who am I going to write with? Went through a lot of musicians, a lot of writing partners. So Andy Rourke, Kevin Armstrong, Stephen Street, for example. 3 writers, trying to find somebody that was, I suppose, compliant and met with his satisfaction. And he didn't tour this record, didn't play live. There was, I think, I'm trying to think of the word to describe it. Probably some hesitancy to get back onto the stage following the split of the Smiths without a band that he felt was at least able to stand up to the Smiths' fierce reputation. And it was a period of public uncertainty and probably a degree of private confusion, which resulted in this album, which I think, when you look back on it now, I would have thought maybe do 2 singles from it, give the album a 12-track list, a 12-track track list, make 3 or 4 of the songs B-sides, couple of singles, play some limited live shows. But obviously that's not quite how things went. With the release of Ouija board, the idea that the tide had turned, that Morrissey represented an old Manchester that had now been made obsolete and outdated, effectively he retreated and thought about a plan B. What am I going to do instead? And the answer, like everything, is you make this up as you go along, like Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you kind of work out what's going to happen. Or as Brian Eno said, you throw your dart at the wall, and then you point your bullseye around where the dart has landed. Bona Drag was a strange period to be a Morrissey fan. It looked like he didn't really know what he was doing or which direction he was going to go in. And I think there was a sense of, you can, when you're launched into a solo career, as a fan of the band and the solo career, you can kind of watch it for a period of time and you can go, I've got faith that this is going to work. I always remember the things that fans said when Take That split in 1996, which is instead of one band that we love, we now have 4 acts. We have Gary, Mark, Howard Donald and Jason Orange. Well, we all know how that worked out, didn't we? With Morrissey, it was the kind of thing we're going, well, the guy that sang in the Smiths is probably not going to make terrible solo albums. They're probably going to be quite good. So you have faith and you trust that that's going to work. And it took a little while, but it got to the point where, and I'm a huge fan of early solo Morrissey, it got to the point where you can kind of watch it, listen to it, see it, experience it, and you can go, this isn't the same, but it's very good, just very different at the same point. And that's where I think we have to go with Bona Drag. In retrospect, I can look at it and go, is it what I wanted it to be? Not really. Would I have made the album differently? Of course. I would have taken Suede Head and Every Day's Like Sunday off. But you can only make sense of things looking backwards once you've lived through it. At the time when you're living it, when you're in the fog of war, it's difficult to work out what's actually going on until the dust clears and you know what's really going on. And then, of course, by which point it's too late to change what happened. And regrets are meaningless. You can only change the future going forward. And there's a really interesting future coming up for when I talk about Morrissey's next album, which is called Kill Uncle. And there's some fabulous stuff going on in there. So that's me talking for an hour about Morrissey, 33 years after the event. 33.3 years, actually, given that it's December 2023 and the album came out in October 1990. So I'm going to wrap up here. Happy Boxing Day. I'm sure your Boxing Day has been more interesting than mine, or more exciting, because I've spent an hour of it talking about a 33-year-old album.